Go. It's football and other F words. My name is Zach Lyons. You can follow me on Twitter /X at FWordsPod. We got Stoney and Mike. The gang is all here. You can follow Mike at Mike Herndon NFL and out at paulkarski.com. He has an article talking about the 5 biggest camp battles as we head into training camp. We're just a little under 2 weeks away. And then we, of course, have Stoney at Stoney Keeley on Twitter. Bros Network, stackandinbox.com. What's Film Friday for stackandinbox.com this week?
So I'm breaking down the Baltimore Ravens' dominant defensive performance against the Houston Texans in the divisional round of the playoffs. I have been combing over some Ravens 2023 tape to try and pick up on some tendencies, maybe what we can expect of Denard Wilson. So I pulled some clips from that particular game. We're going to go over it because I do think that it was a masterful performance by that Ravens defense. I watched it and thought, man, this is not the traditional brick wall defense you think of when you hear good defense. This is more like a Rubik's Cube. And they had CJ Stroud in a blender in that game. It was awesome.
Well, hopefully the Tennessee Titans can bring forth some of that magic when they play CJ Stroud twice a week. Or twice the season.
Twice a week would be a lot.
A week would be a lot. That'd be too much CJ Stroud for everyone. Bluegrass Beverages, our sponsor, Hendersonville, Tennessee. Head out to Bluegrass Beverages. They've been around for over 50 years. Get you some liquor, get you some alcohol, some beer, some tequila, whatever floats your boat. They have it over at Bluegrass Beverages. They also have your hangover cures, your water, your salty snacks, your sweet snacks. They got everything over at Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville, Tennessee. And boys, we're just going to jump right in. We're talking about the defensive line today. And I think I'm most excited about training camp because I'm tired. And it won't stop, but I'm just so fucking tired of hearing about T'Vondre Sweat and his past and his history and people rehashing stuff that we already knew in April. So I'm just, I am just tired of the T'Vondre Sweat. Like, can we at least let the guy see the field? I mean, why does it have to be some sweeping, proclamation about every rookie and specifically about T'Vondre Sweat? Because if you make such a proclamation and you turn out wrong, you're going to look really fucking stupid. And I have a feeling that people are going to look really fucking stupid. And, I'm over it. I am over. I've been off Twitter for a while. I've just kind of been like lurking in the shadows of group chats and checking that. I haven't really been messing with it during this break. And I couldn't imagine what other filth and trash takes and articles have been written that are just really meaningless and pointless about T'Vondre Sweat. So, I mean, it all got rehashed because Dane Brugler went on and repeated what he's already repeated multiple times, and everybody's acting like it's some new revelation or some kind of confirmation.
It was in the Beast. It was discussed ad nauseum pre-draft. I don't know why anyone's acting like what he said was new information. Same stuff we've been talking about.
So when you put this topic on the list for today, Zach, I've been kind of offline as well the last week or so too. So I'm like, oh, there must be some new information about T'Vondre Sweat. And then I looked it up and I actually jotted down. I was going to ask you, is this all because Dane Brugler went on Buck's show and said stuff we've known for months? So now it's buying aggregators a week's worth of content. Is that why we're talking about
exactly?
Confirm. Okay.
Uncreative people that already have a bias and they need it constantly confirmed and affirmed because they have, I guess maybe, I don't know. Is it big egos that need to be constantly stroked or something? I don't get it.
Yeah.
This is just at this point, it's almost like borderline weird bullying, like a weird form of bullying that you can't let it go, that the Tennessee Titans have drafted T'Vondre Sweat and
people want to be right.
He missed practice, but they're acting like he missed practice is indicative of the past stuff. Like, well, he must have been hungover, and that's why he couldn't do practices, or he must have partied too hard last night. It's because it can't just be because he had a hamstring, which even the most fit of people have gotten hamstring injuries in training camp and maybe missed this. I don't know what his injury was, but it's been reported that's a lower body injury. So, like, I mean, where is this hate if, like, A.J. Brown had gotten, when A.J. Brown missed practices, nobody really cared. It's just because the people have this strange, we talk about it with Anthony Richardson, we talk about it with Will Levis. People have this strange pre-draft bias, and they have to constantly affirm themselves that their pre-draft take was right, no matter what evidence or what is put in front of them from here on out. And he's been pretty much off Instagram for the most part. He had a camp, right? So he had one of those youth camps that many people tend to have. And
was he drunk for that?
No. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if he was what was in the Kool-Aid or the Gatorade, or whatever. But then you have people saying that he's gained weight. There's people dissecting that picture of him with kids and all this stuff. Like,
yeah,
the guy's never going to catch a break. And listen, I get it. He had an pre-draft cycle that I'm sure he wants to, forget, right? I'm sure that is the case. But at the end of the day, at some point, you just have to let the kid play and either prove you're wrong or prove you're right. This pre-draft bias that you keep bringing up is just ridiculous. Dissecting every little image and every little video of any rookie, I think, is just so fucking weird. Except for when it was Isaiah Wilson, because it was just a comedy of errors. It was constantly,
I was about to say, that was funny.
You just couldn't believe how stupid one person could be. I mean, Mike, you're a Texas fan, and there's been talks about his leadership and all this stuff, and we've talked about it on here.
Yeah.
But, like, isn't this just a little tired and a little weird at this point?
I'm so exhausted of having this discussion, honestly. I mean, I don't know how many different ways you can say the same thing over and over and over again, because this is the exact same conversation that was happening the day after he was drafted, and it's the same conversation now, and people are just rehashing it and using like a hamstring injury and OTAs as evidence that now he's clearly this failure of a draft pick, and it's like this race to be out on a guy first. I just don't get it. But I have a couple thoughts that I feel like I need to put out here. First, Dane Brugler saying he was off some teams' boards. Sure, I'm certain that's true. Some teams will have different, tolerances, different levels of what they will accept and what they won't. Some teams may have just been more comfortable with him than other teams. Guess what? Jeffrey Simmons was a guy who was reportedly, not on everyone's board because of his history and his past, and the fact that he was coming off of a torn ACL that had just happened right before the draft, right? So let's not act like the fact that they were off of some team's board means that they're a failure as a player already. Like that is not the be all end all. And it also doesn't mean that they weren't going to be picked, 38th if some team had traded up, or 39th or 40th or whoever, like the Bengals wouldn't have taken him. That does not mean that the Bengals would not have taken him. Unless you can tell me that the Bengals did not have him on their draft board, then you can't tell me anything about whether or not the Bengals would have selected him at 40 or wherever they picked, because they picked back-to-back defensive linemen like right after that, right? So I just think it's ridiculous that people are jumping to it's just jumping to the nth most conclusions based off one little small nugget of data that we really don't know a whole lot about. I mean, yeah, I'm not surprised he was off some teams' boards. Obviously, he was not off everyone's board. So I think it's kind of ridiculous to just jump to a conclusion. Well, he would have been there in the 7th round. God, it's just wild, but
super disingenuous.
It is.
My favorite part is people are like, Did you see how happy the Rams were that we selected T'Vondre Sweat? Well, yeah, because they knew that the Tennessee Titans were going to select a defensive lineman, and T'Vondre Sweat and Braden Fisk were the two best defensive linemen on the board, regardless of their off-field issues of T'Vondre Sweat. They
wanted Fisk. They were happy that they were going to get their guy, and just because they wanted Fisk does not mean that Fisk is automatically a better player than Sweat. It just means that's who the Rams wanted. That's who fit the Rams scheme and what the Rams want to do. It does not mean that he's a better football player. So yeah, all the stuff about, well, I watched that video. They looked awfully happy. Of course they were happy. They got the guy they wanted.
Those teams are, I'll say something. If you show them on video, most teams are pretty excited when they get the guy that they were targeting.
Absolutely.
And you know, it's just how the draft works. Like, I don't understand how people forget not everything is some like hidden dig. There are just genuinely like, they were super excited because they wanted Braden Fisk and they were afraid that that's who the Titans were going to take. And it's not a dig at T'Vondre Sweat. It's that they got their guy. The guy they traded up for, they got their guy.
They're two different players too, Fisk and Sweat.
Yeah.
So it's not like it was a one or the other kind of thing. Like, if you had a style you wanted, you had a player. So when the Titans, don't take that guy, of course the Rams are going to celebrate because they're probably thinking, we got our guy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just crazy. And
Gary,
I feel like we're just saying at this point common sense stuff to combat these takes, right? I mean, like, everything we're saying is pretty common sense. It's nothing that we're pulling out of our ass or anything. It's just common sense of how the NFL works and how, players off draft boards. Sure. How many of those teams that took T'Vondre Sweat off their draft board had defensive line as a high priority, or defensive tackle or nose tackle as a high priority? I mean, like, not every team has that as a high priority. So some teams are going to be comfortable taking a guy off a board when they don't need that guy in particular.
Yeah, why would they want to take a risk if that's not a huge need? Any risk at all, no matter how much they perceive that to be. And I think this is also a point I pulled the wrong one. This is also,
I was like, what point
I pulled the wrong one. This is a point that I think is also explicitly said in that Rams video, where they were excited about the fact that they were pairing Fisk with his college teammate, what's his name, the edge rusher, Jared Verse, that they had taken in the first round. So McVay specifically said, we thought that those two guys amplified each other, and what they did well complemented each other, and we wanted to be able to just bring that combo and import it directly into our defense. So yeah, they had another reason that they liked Fisk specifically. So again, like, people mess this up all the time, and I think I don't know if it's some people I think are being disingenuous and intellectually dishonest when they make these leaps, but all teams do not view players the same way. Just because one team has Fisk above Sweat does not mean the next team has Fisk above Sweat. So, like, I just think it's ridiculous that people act like the Rams are now the team that knows all the good defensive tackles, and Titans don't know shit over here. Like, what are these teams doing? So I just think it's kind of ridiculous. And yeah, I mean, sure, they probably were offered the same trade that ended up going to, what was it, the Panthers?
No, the Panthers countered. So I do agree that they were initially offered the same trade.
They were offered
but
something
then the Panthers
similar.
were the only team to counter.
Yeah. But again, like, hey, we don't know how big of a grade they have on Sweat. And we also don't know what kind of player Sweat is going to be. And that's like the biggest thing in all of this to me, is like, nobody knows the answer. We can all guess right now. I think if you watch his tape, he was clearly dominant at the college level. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be dominant at the pro level, but it's probably the best predictor we have, is just watching the tape and seeing if a guy is unblockable, which is what he was. So I just think, I'm optimistic about him. I'm not saying you can't be pessimistic about his projection at the NFL level, But I'm just saying, let's be realistic and admit that the book is not closed on Devondre Sweat. It's not even fucking open yet, right? So we don't need to jump to massive conclusions. Let's see this guy get on pads for the first time in Titans colors. Let's see a guy get on the preseason playing field for the first time in Titans colors. Let's see him play a regular season game before we even start to like decide that, oh, this was a mistake or this was the best pick in Titans. Like, who knows? I just, there's a wide range of outcomes here. We'll see.
I'd rather take the risk, and I'm going to ask you this question, Stoney. Your camera is terrible today, by the way. Just downright atrocious. Just want you to know that. But I want to ask you this question because a lot of people are like, well, why didn't they just trade back to 52? Okay, let's say they do. Then you're likely getting one of these guys, either Mason Smith, Chris Jenkins, or a guy maybe that was after him, Michael Hall Jr., right? Marshawn Nealon was there too. All four of those guys, isn't Devondre Sweat, graded out higher than all four of those guys in our opinions? I think that was our opinions the whole way through. Maybe Nealon. I'm sure maybe you guys had Nealon higher than Sweat, but it seems like the NFL wasn't as high on Nealon as we were. But you look at Mason Smith, that was an overdraft, and that was drafted before the Rams pick at 52. Chris Jenkins, I don't think any of us liked Chris Jenkins that much. And really, I think that Devondre Sweat is a guy that at least I did. And so I'm going to ask you, Stoney, I had above all four of those guys, Michael Hall Jr., Chris Jenkins, Mason Smith, and Marshawn Nealon.
Yeah, I had him way above all of those guys. I had him at 36th overall on my board. I didn't flinch. I didn't move him at all when all of the DWI stuff came out. And I was never really that low on Sweat. I think you can nitpick his game quite a bit, but in relation to the rest of this defensive line class, I thought he was head and shoulders. I thought he was up there with the Byron Murphys of this class. Like, I think if he would have gone from a talent perspective, if he would have gone in the first round, I wouldn't have had a gripe with it. Now, Marshawn Nealon's probably the closest of that group to me, or to him for me. But even then, like I'm still taking Sweat, man. I just think the potential of what he can do for a defensive line, if he and Simmons stay healthy, and I would throw Sebastian Joseph Day in there too. If those guys stay healthy, this defensive line is going to be a problem. And it is in large part because of the complementary piece they added in Devondre Sweat next to Jeffrey Simmons.
Well, and Mike, I'll ask you, a lot of people think that he wouldn't have gone in the top 50. I vehemently disagree. When you look at, do you think the Jaguars had Devondre Sweat or Mason Smith higher? Like, let's be honest here. They obviously had Mason Smith really high, but I would assume they would have Devondre Sweat higher.
I won't speak for the Jaguars because they do crazy stuff like take Javon Walker over Aiden Hutchinson. But I had Sweat above all of those guys. I would say it was close with Nealon, kind of like Stoney. I think I had them in the same general area. And Nealon has his own red flags too, right? Like the fact that like 70% of his sack production came against Eastern Michigan, for example. I think Sweat, to me, certainly I don't have any issue with the pick where they took it. Obviously, we talked about that consistently. And I think people are bedwetting over a non-issue at this point. I understand it would have been better had he had J.C. Latham's off season and not missed any practices and all that. But injuries happen, and if he's out there the first week of training camp and the pads come on and he's dominating and can't be blocked by the middle of that offensive line, people are going to forget about all this stuff, and we're going to have wasted 2 months of our lives discussing nonsense for no reason. And a lot of, tweets will probably be deleted. So
I'll never forget. And let me just say this, just because that some of these other teams in between where Devondre Sweat went and where the Rams traded their draft pick at 52, so between 30 and 52, didn't take a defensive lineman, doesn't mean they didn't have Sweat ranked higher than the guy they drafted. Like, we don't know that. The Saints very well could have had, for an example, They got Paulson Adebo. They already had Marshawn Lattimore, but their defensive tackles are Kalen Saunders and Nathan Shepard, which Nathan Shepard is fine. But don't you think that you could have upgraded with Tavondre Sweat, but then Tavondre Sweat's off the board, and then maybe they take Kool-Aid McKinstry? We don't know any of those teams didn't have Tavondre Sweat. So this idea that for sure he would have gotten to 52, and I was on that train before the draft and everything, and I think pretty much, even though some teams have him off the board, even Dane Brugler admitted in that interview that he probably let it affect his rankings a little too much. He even admitted it. So I said the NFL does not view the stuff that Tavondre Sweat went through as heavy, with a heavy hand in judgment, as the outsiders do. And not to excuse what he did or anything, but at the end of the day, he didn't, the NFL, like we said, I don't think, really put him down out of the top 50 players. So all this to say, as we pretty much have rehashed and beaten to death the Tavondre Sweat stuff, is let's let the kid play a year. Let's see what he is this year before we do anything. Stoney has lost the stream, so he was
barely hanging on it.
Yeah, he's barely hanging on for dear life. Let me just send him a text. Okay. So let's get into the rest of the defensive line, because this week ESPN has been polling execs, coaches, etc., anonymously, and having them ranking players. Jeffrey Simmons came in at 4th on the list, 4th best DT, behind Quinnen Williams. And these aren't in, it was Chris Jones, then Quinnen Williams and Dexter Lawrence, or Dexter Lawrence, Quinnen Williams were flipped. I don't.
Yeah, Quinnen Williams, then Dexter. Yeah.
So I think 4th is, I was actually a little surprised they still had him ranked 4th after him suffering an injury and him not playing consistently. And that is something that they did talk about, was the fact that Big Jeff, it kind of is a little inconsistent with his play. And it's like they basically said, and I'm trying to find it, but essentially that when he wants to turn it on, he's almost unstoppable.
Yeah.
So I look at that and I go, that's something that we've kind of all talked about, something about him being pretty much unstoppable at that point, and he just has to do that consistently. And some of that has been injuries, but Jeffrey Simmons is kind of a guy that, and I think right here, Chef Rand puts it best, is he needs to prove he's top 2. I'd agree. Yeah. I don't have no problem with his rankings, no but he needs to be, with Aaron Donald gone, he needs to prove and be a dominant force that can maybe contend to be in one of those top 2 spots, contend with the Dexter Lawrence, Quinnen Williams. Because I do think it's like Chris Jones, then it's a tier of Dexter Lawrence, Quinnen Williams, then it's another tier down and there's kind of a couple other people. He needs to start jumping some tiers.
I think Simmons is right in there with the Quinnen Williams, Dexter Lawrence tier. I think he's in that mix. Now he needs to be healthier more consistently than he has been the last couple of years, because I do think like the ankle issues that seem almost chronic at this point for him, which is concerning. Those when he's playing with an ankle injury, he's clearly not nearly as effective. Like, it's pretty obvious when he's 100% versus when he's not. And I don't think it's like a motor running hot and cold kind of thing. I think it's mostly just how he's dealing with, like, how healthy his lower body is. And when he's healthy, he's extremely good. And I think he is in that tier. But when he's not healthy, he's definitely a tier down at that point. But I kind of view it as like, hey, if you wanted to put Dexter Lawrence, Jeff Simmons, and Quinnen Williams in any order, I'm not going to fight you in any of those guys being number 2, 3, or 4. Like, I have no issue with any of
that. I don't think I'd put him up as high as Dexter Lawrence, personally. Now, I know Dexter Lawrence is ranked 3, but that's just my I was kind of surprised Quinnen Williams was 2. But I think there needs to be he needs to start getting some more stats, start stacking some more stats. I mean, he's 7th since coming into the league the past 3 years. He ranks 7th amongst defensive tackles with 21.5 sacks. So, you want to see that number go up. But I look at it and I go, this right here, this line from a head scout with an NFL team really hit home for me. When he's focused and sets out to make a lot of plays, he's pretty much unblockable. And I think that there is this PK kind of talked a little bit about his leadership style, Jeffrey Simmons' leadership style. He's more reserved and stuff. And I do wonder if like this reserved mindset leads to these inconsistent performances week in and week out where he's not taking over these games. Because when he's focused and sets out to make the plays, this guy's right. He's pretty much unstoppable. And so I will say this, and the guy, because he follows it up, he's like, I think we'll have a big year similar to Justin Madubuike in this Baltimore scheme. And we're going to talk about this defensive line. But like Justin Madubuike had a lot of help. There's a lot of good players in the defense for the Ravens that can help Justin Madubuike, be freed up and all this kind of stuff. So I kind of look at it and I'm like, I hope that he has a Justin Madubuike type year because that helps. That helps with this consistency issue. That helps with him performing up to the level of his contract. So because we're going to talk about next week, when we talk about the edge class, how overpaid Harold Landry is, and how your article is just fluff about Harold Landry, and like I'll pause for a second. Is Harold Landry like being in shooting distance of breaking the all-time sack record? Whatever. That's just more of an indictment of the Tennessee Titans.
No, I'm not saying it's good because I mean, yeah,
of Harold Landry.
I mean, look, there are teams with guys that have hundreds of like over 100 sacks, right? There's a bunch of teams that have that, so it is partially a low bar. But we're still talking about a guy in like Javon Kearse, who was a successful NFL pass rusher, and I'm not saying that Landry is better than Kearse or anything like that, but I think his productiveness has been underrated criminally by one, this fan base, and then two, nationally. I think he is more productive and better than what he gets credit for from this fan base. And it sounds like you're one of them. You're one of the chief Landry deniers.
Because, hey, listen, the stats don't lie, right? He's got some good sacks. But really, he's a cleanup artist. It's like he doesn't affect the play.
He's not an elite pass rusher, but he did have the best win rate of his career down the stretch last year. So I think there's some hope that maybe we're seeing the best version of him in 2024.
We'll see. We'll talk about this next week. But
all right.
But a guy who we need to see the best from is Jeffrey Simmons, because you look at this defensive line. This defense, I go back and forth on this defense. Like, oh man, it's gonna be really good, but man, if there's like one injury, this defense could just fall apart.
Oh,
pretty
disaster!
Quick. Because the depth at defensive line is just as bad as the depth at linebacker, is just as bad as the depth at safety, and it's just as bad as the depth at edge. Yeah, all those positions have horrible depth, just terrible depth. Now, maybe that's projection, right? Maybe some of these players elevate their game because of the coaching staff. We don't know how much the coaching staff can elevate. I mean, I think there are some safe bets, but sometimes people tend to surprise you, when new coaches and new staffs come in.
My only problem with that is that almost all the guys that are depth at all of these positions are first or second year UDFAs. Like, these are not guys with any sort of pedigree. And I mean, maybe one or two of them maybe is like a hidden gem that could turn into a like mediocre starter one day. But the odds of any of those guys turning out to be plus players is like almost zero. And you've got them literally right below the starters at every single position on this defense. It's terrifying to look at.
Big Jeff has missed some games. He's been injured. We know Tavondre Sweat, there is a risk. He's already injured right now. There is a risk that maybe he misses games. Sebastian Joseph Day is maybe a guy that can be what he was because now he's paired with someone. He doesn't have to be the guy, And I think when he has to be the guy, that's when, he falls off in all those statistical categories and play on the field and all that kind of stuff. But like if Big Jeff misses time, you have the corners, right, to maybe alleviate some of the pressure. But who comes in if Big Jeff misses time? And what if at the same time Tavondre Sweat? Like Quinton Bohanna, I using quotation marks because he's not a real person. Keandre Coburn, TK McClendon. This is a trash heap. And we're going to talk about how the Titans need to add a pass rusher. I mean, where can they go to improve this defensive line this late in the game? Because I don't even know if Emmanuel Ogbah can come in and take some of that pressure off the line as a defensive end. But at this point, this is disgusting behind these guys.
The frontline starters, I agree, are fine. I mean, and maybe even good with if Sweat is who we think he is, right? But yeah, I mean, they are 1 or 2 injuries away from it being a complete and utter disaster up front. And I do agree. Like, look, the corners are going to hold up better. That's going to help, the defensive line and the edge rushers have more time to get home. I think that'll be a major, major part of what this defense has to be, just because of the way it's constructed. And I do agree, like they're going to blitz, and I think Kenneth Murray and guys like that coming off the second level will be a part of the pass rush. But it's not even just pass rush either, though, right? I mean, you're talking about you don't have strong inside linebackers, right? So if you don't have Simmons or Sweat, either one, you've got probably some run defense issues too. And I mean, I'm the first to say run defense does not matter that much, but it matters a little bit. If you cannot stop the run and you're getting gashed, and it's because, Jack Gibbons is all of a sudden getting covered up by guards because he's slow as shit and they're easily able to get up to him because it's Quinton Bohanna and Keandre Coburn in there in front of them. That's a problem. Like that's going to be a problem. So I think it's the depth is super thin. I like Sebastian Joseph Day. I think, in their, say they're 3 down fronts with Sweat, Simmons, and Day. I think that's nice. I think that's like a high quality group. I just don't have any faith in any of the guys behind them. Coburn, I can kind of see it. Like, I mean, he's a big guy. He's a nose tackle backup. Got 0 pass rush ability. Like, you were getting nothing from him as a pass rusher. And I just don't know that there's another guy down there. I mean, there's not another guy down there that you have any confidence in playing on third downs, right?
Yeah, right. I'm looking at the defensive tackle list, not the defensive end list, but the defensive tackle list. It's Fletcher Cox, who is retired. So good luck trying to get. Maybe he comes out for Tracy Rocker out of retirement, but not for the Titans as he's back. But Brian Moan, Hassan Ridgeway, Lawrence Guy, Al Woods, Linval Joseph, Nick Williams. Which, by the way, Nick Williams, Linval Joseph, Al Woods, and Lawrence Guy are all above 34 years old.
Yeah, I was going to say, all of those guys, if you recognize their name, it's because they're like my age.
Yeah, I mean, these that's what's out there. And I'm looking at the defensive ends. I mean, you got Emmanuel Ogbah. My gosh.
The defense needs to stay healthy all
Henry
season.
Anderson, I guess, would be fine. Shaq Lawson. I mean, it's bad out there, and it's just not a good group. And Stoney, we were talking about, if Tavondre Sweat or Jeffrey Simmons goes down with injury, like, even heaven forbid if they go down at the same time, but can they get away with what they got at least for a game or two until one of these guys comes back? But I feel like they've lost themselves. If you get a a season-ending injury on the defensive line, it's kind of like getting a season-ending injury at edge or season injury at safety or inside linebacker. You're in trouble. Safety, you're not in trouble because there's guys out there in free agency. Edge, you got a few guys that maybe could come in, but you need to go ahead and get them now. I feel like you need to get Carl Lawson. I'll keep doing that, beating that drum. Go sign Carl Lawson. But this defensive line, I mean, it feels like they are just playing with fire. Stoney, what do you think about their approach for the defensive line?
I think they're going to be completely fucked if either of these guys go down for an extended amount of time with an injury. I think the depth here is shoddy at best. I like Sebastian Joseph Day as a sort of tertiary piece on this defensive line. I mean, he got kind of pushed around in the run game. He does appear to have a lighter frame. I don't know how much he weighs off the top of my head. And watching some of his Chargers tape from last year, like they just lined him up over the right guard, went one-on-one. He got pushed back quite a bit. I do think he's twitchy. I think he's pretty explosive, active with his hands, good first step. And I look at that and I think maybe they could kind of kick him out to the edge and maybe use him similarly to how they used Danico Autry before. And if that's the case, you got T'Vondre Sweat in the middle and Simmons and Sebastian Joseph Day on both sides of him, flanked. I think you got a pretty good defensive front there. If any of those guys go down and you're asking, I would say probably Keandre Coburn as the fourth guy to step up. It's a massive step down in quality. And in this day and age, man, like I said earlier, I've been kind of studying the Ravens defense a little bit for Friday's piece on Stacking the Inbox. There were times I had to pause the tape and be like, okay, wait a second. Who's 99? Who's 51? They're just subbing in guys left and right. You need a deep defensive line rotation to hang in the modern NFL. And you're looking at like Quentin Bohanna, who I think, Zach, you've said you don't even know if he's real. I can't verify.
I am telling you right now that is not a real person.
Yeah. And then Marlon Davidson.
That's a witness protection identity. Like that is a fake identity.
Yeah, Marlon Davidson's not going to do anything for you. I watched a little bit of his tape prepping for today's show, and it's just like stands up, gets washed out of the play. Like it's a big body you could put out there, and maybe if guys don't move him, you might have something there.
Justin Mello's Garrett Warlow, whatever his last name is, defensive line player. He talked about Marlon Davidson at the beginning of the year. And
good for him.
But I gotta bring up that Garrett Warlow piece that he put out on, I don't know if it's Music City Miracles, Titan Sized, or Broadway Sports, one of the 3 sites that he writes for. But he's like, don't sleep on him. He can flat out ball. Garrett Warlow? That's who you're talking about? He can flat out ball? Like, give me a fucking break.
He was a player in college. Now I've not seen him do anything in the NFL, but he was a player in college.
He can flat out ball though.
I watched that
Seahawks
football,
maybe
game.
It's something else.
I watched that Seahawks game from last year, and it was when like everybody was hurt. It's late in the season. It's a non-conference game, so nobody gave a shit. It was just both teams lining up and running the ball and maybe throwing a pass once every 8 snaps or something like that. Awful game to watch. They had all of these guys in there. TK McClendon at defensive end. A few times that like he flashed, but I'm just thinking like I stopped watching the game. I'm like, I can't evaluate anybody from this game. This is just hot garbage. There's one guy, and I still don't know how to pronounce his last name, but I like Isaiah Iton a little bit out of Rutgers. Now, I think the guy is built like Thanos. He looks like a supervillain. Pretty good run defender at Rutgers. I don't know what the coaches were asking him to do because I didn't see like any pass rush moves at all. So the optimist view is that maybe he is a sort of lump of clay type of player, but now I'm sitting here talking myself into undrafted free agents again, like, oh, maybe this guy can turn into something, and it just rarely works out. I think they're in a really bad spot at defensive line if Simmons, if Sweat, or if Joseph Day goes down to injury. And I don't like the prospects of Joseph Day being the number 1 in this defense either. I think he's probably best served where he can play as a sort of sidekick to Simmons and Sweat.
You know, Tracy Rocker's been around the block in the NFL. He's been a Tennessee Titans coach before. And he's been here's where I'm at. I think Tracy Rocker is a downgrade from Coach T last year. And while I think there are other upgrades across this defensive staff, particularly the defensive coordinator, I do think this is a downgrade. And I really wish they could have figured out how to keep Coach T. I mean, he the only shirts he owned are Titan shirts because he wore the same thing at the Senior Bowl every damn day. So he was really invested in the Tennessee Titans. So I really wish they would have kept Coach T, because then I feel a little bit better if there is an injury that maybe for a game or two you can get by because Coach T is coaching that defensive line group. With Tracy Rocker, I know a lot of people like Tracy Rocker, and I know the Eagles' defensive line was good, as Chef Rand points out, but also the defensive line for the Eagles was super fucking deep and filled with A-plus players. Like, to me, that's where
the number 9 overall pick off the bench. That is not the situation here for Tracy this year.
I mean, what Tracy has had to work with is an elite talent of defense, all the way through for many years. I mean, even Milton Williams has turned into something. Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, were guys that they had. They also obviously mentioned Fletcher Cox. They had Marlon Tuipulotu at different points. Like, they had all of these guys that he was able to coach.
And he's kind of at some point there. Yeah.
Right. Like, I have a hard time thinking that the Eagles' Tracy Rocker in year 20 of coaching, right? This is he's been in the NFL, and I'm pulling it up right now. He's been in the NFL 2011 to 2013 with Tennessee Titans, so there's 3 seasons. Then he came back for the Titans again for 2017, 2018, 2019. So there's 3 more seasons. That's University of Tennessee. Yeah. Sorry. And then he's with the Eagles. But when you really look at it, none of his stops have been that impressive until he got to the Eagles, and that's when he had really great talent. Does not mean that he can't coach, but we have seen in the NFL that what he has been able to do has been less than impressive outside of his stint with the Eagles. So Chef Ren says, well, Denard had good players too, just to play advocate. I will say this about Denard Wilson. There's a lot of information out there about Denard Wilson where he has turned players. Look at the defensive backs for the Ravens. They got down bad in injuries, and they're throwing out there like Anthony Averett and Ronald Darby and Geno Stone, who was an undrafted free agent. Like, there's a little bit of difference of what Denard has done, even when he's had good players, versus what Tracy Rocker has done throughout all their stops. So, I know that Denard Wilson has a lot of respect for Tracy Rocker, but sometimes that respect can get you into those Vrabel-like situations where you should have hired maybe someone a little bit different outside of your comfort zone for a certain position group. And we'll see. But
I'll also say that the vast majority of coaches, if they had players who were wildly successful under them, this is largely because the players were wildly talented. Like, there's very few coaches in the NFL that are like kingmakers, right? I mean, Bill Callahan is one of them. But it's maybe 10 total, across all position groups that are hey, this guy will turn you into a real player, and really make a difference in your career. Otherwise, it's mostly trying to incrementally improve guys, but they have to have the talent, right? And even with Callahan, he can take me and turn me into a Pro Bowl offensive lineman in 2 years, right? There's got to be a level of talent there. And then if the player is willing to take the teaching, then he can get more out of you. But I just don't know that, looking for Tracy Rocker to turn TK McClendon into, Aaron Donald or something like that, that's not happening. And there's only so much he can do, right? If you give him trash, you're probably going to get trash results. He's got some talent on the top line, but if, like we've been talking about, if anybody goes down, it's trouble. Although I do want to talk about specifically Sweat and his combination with Simmons and whether there's an amplification there, because I think you can make an argument that what Sweat is pretty close to what Denard Wilson was experiencing with Michael Pierce with the Ravens. Obviously, Denard Wilson was not running that defense. He was just, a part of it. But Michael Pierce very much in the Tavondre Sweat mold of player. Justin Matabuke definitely within the mold of Jeffrey Simmons. So that is definitely an apples to apples comparison between those top line guys for the Ravens and the top line guys for the Titans. Now, if they can both stay healthy and you get Sweat anything close to what he was like at Texas, I think you're cooking, right? As long as they stay healthy. And they hopefully don't need to come off the field that much, or at least you're smart about targeting where those guys get their breaks, because I think it's going to be ugly. I think you're going to notice it a lot. It's going to be obvious when those guys are not in the game versus when they are, right? I think it's when you go with the hockey line change and you got, Quentin Bohanna and TK McClendon running out there, you're not even going to need to look at the numbers on the field. You're just going to see the line of scrimmage go from moving this way to moving that way, right? Like, I don't think it's going to be very difficult to realize when those guys are not in the game.
Well, Stoney, let me ask you, looking at Sweat, looking at, my gosh, I'm blanking right now because I got something pulled up for later, but looking at Jeffrey Simmons, where do you go with, if they were to come off, or how many snaps can they play? How many snaps will they get to play together, and what can you do in those snaps? But what is the run defense going to look like, you think, with a Jarrell? God, that's why I have it up, Jarrell Casey. But Jeffrey, because to give Tracy Rocker some props, he was Jarrell Casey's coach the first 3 years that Jarrell Casey was in the league. And so I do need to say that if we're talking about a guy that can maybe develop someone, that would be a good example. It's a feather in the cap for him. Tracy Rocker is Jarrell Casey.
Definitely. And he was there when Klug was there as well, right?
Yeah,
I think
but
they
Klug was
overlapped.
a nobody. I know you love Klug because he's white, but he was a nobody.
Klug because he's good. Don't you take swipes at Carl Klug on this podcast? Disgusting.
But
behavior.
I mean, what I think we all think that the pass rush will be better with both those guys on the field, but a lot of people are calling him, have called Tavondre Sweat a run-stuffing nose tackle, and he wasn't really not really is that what he is, but what does the run defense look like? Because you're talking about a defense that was still a run defense that was still top 8 in yards per carry allowed on the ground. So obviously run defense doesn't matter too much, but you have running quarterbacks in this division. You're going to be facing some running quarterbacks. You're going to be facing some really good running backs almost, every time you play a game. So where are you at on what this run defense could look like with Tavondre Sweat and Jeffrey Simmons next to each other?
Yeah, I think at its ceiling, at its peak, the full vision of this project, I think you've got a two-man clog in the middle, and both of these guys tend to eat up double teams. So eventually it is going to become a numbers game for opposing offensive coordinators to consider. If you've got to dedicate 2 guys to Sweat, 2 guys to Simmons, then it frees up the pass rushers, the linebackers. We talk a lot of shit about the linebackers that the Titans have, and rightfully so, but I think you can say the one thing that they excel at, a guy like Jack Gibbons, sound, gap discipline, and Kenneth Murray being the heat-seeking missile, those sorts of things. When they have a target locked on, then they can make the tackle. And I think it helps those players when you have offensive lines giving so much attention to Simmons and Sweat, because they are unblockable at times, right? Or at least, we're walking through the full extent of this vision right here. If those guys are unblockable, you got to dedicate extra resources to it, and then it frees up the guys around them to get in there and make plays. And I think in the run game specifically, if you can stop guys even when you're at a numbers disadvantage, then you're really cooking on run defense. And I think with the linebackers, the pass rushers that they have, you're not looking at the edge guys having to beat the tackles to, get to the quarterback. If they can just set the edge, let the interior do their thing, and have the linebackers plug the gaps, you've got a brick wall that, the best running offenses are going to have trouble running through.
Yeah,
the chat is all mad at me for my Carl Klug slander.
It's a terrible take. It's a terrible
calling
take.
it insane and everything. I mean, the guy played in the NFL. Was that 7 years and has as many sacks as Jeffrey Simmons has right now. So yeah, he's fantastic.
Yeah, he was a fifth round pick.
There is no better couple than Titans fans and mediocre white players. Like, I mean, they are just
he had 7 sacks as
and
a
you're
rookie.
average. They will fucking fall all over to talk about some Carl Klug.
7 sacks off the bench as a rookie. That's pretty damn
probably
good.
the same
For a
crew
fifth
that
round
likes
pick.
Mason Kinsey.
That could have been the only thing he did in his whole career. It still would have been pretty damn good.
Carl Klug, you guys are insane. Okay, Mike, is the biggest storyline from T'Vondre Sweat on this defensive line? No, I mean, like, let's be honest.
Yeah.
I know we talked about how people are just bashing and bashing and bashing, but it's almost like you have to be on Sweat watch because you want to see him stay healthy. You want to see, and this goes for any rookie, you want to see him stay healthy. You want to see him contribute. Because, I mean, you want to see Cedric Gray contribute, right? You don't want to see Jack Gibby on the field. Maybe you guys do because, Mike, because you like, Carl Klug, and Jack Gibby is the Carl Klug of linebackers. So maybe you want to see some more Jack Gibby. But, I mean, you want to see Cedric Gray, contribute and everything. So obviously health is the thing, but we're going to be talking about Sweat all summer long, right? Not just sweating, but actual sweat.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, Sweat's definitely the story here because, I mean, look, he's the 38th overall pick. That's a high pick that comes with some expectations. And look, he was the, Outland Trophy winner last year for the best lineman on both sides of the ball in college football last year. So he comes in with some expectations. He's a, obviously large human who will clearly gain attention just looking at the field. And I just think, his potential impact on Simmons and the rest of this defense is potentially big. And if he plays well, it could make a big difference for what this defense can be. And if he can't get on the field or he doesn't play well, you're probably going to have trouble because there's just not, like we've been harping on now at this point for almost an hour. There's no depth here, so there's a lot of pressure on him, and I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. And he is the biggest amplification factor, whether this is going to be a good unit or a bad unit this year. So I think it's warranted that he is the center of attention here. We know what we're getting out of Simmons, right? I mean, he's going to be good.
Tony, what do you have to see from T'Vondre Sweat over the summer heading into the regular season to make you feel comfortable? Like, okay, well, this pick was warranted. And again, it's almost a 3-year thing with rookies for the most part. Like, sometimes it takes 3 years to reach your full potential. But like, what's going to make you feel a little bit more comfortable about this unit heading into the regular season? Is it him staying healthy? Because we know there are off days and rest days, and I'm sure he will be one of the guys to get a rest day or off day where he's not out there and everybody will overreact. But is it really staying healthy, or are you more focused on what he does in joint practices? Is it all of the above? I mean, what is it that you have to see out of this unit, specifically T'Vondre Sweat, over the summer to be like, okay, we're cooking with gas heading into 2024?
So step by step. One, I want to see that he actually takes the field, because we still don't really know what we can guess, but we still don't really know what the injury issue was that kept him off the field during the OTA. So step one, like, just get out there. Just get out there. Let's see how he looks. And then it's a matter of conditioning, right? Let's see what the reports suggest when he is out there practicing. We don't want to see any of this stuff like we saw with Traylon Burks, not to just have Burks catching random strays on our defensive line episode, but he's got asthma. Well, he's got asthma, and he can't go as hard as the other guys out there. I don't want to hear any of that stuff with Sweat. Like, I want to hear that he does look like he's in shape, that he's out there doing the work when he's asked to do the work. And then from there, let's get a gauge on joint practices when you go up against another team for the first time throughout the preseason. How's he look? And if we get to the end of this whole summer process and the guy has dropped weight, he's in shape, he's played, he's stayed healthy, then I'm going to be like, okay, let's see what it means. Let's see what it does when the games mean more.
Mike, do you have to see him get below 366 this year, or are you comfortable at the 366?
I honestly don't care what weight he plays at, as long as he's effective.
What if it's 450 pounds?
I'm fine. Hey, if he can play and move at 450 pounds, good for you, you know? I think realistically, they're probably the ideal weight. I mean, they've stated that the ideal weight is closer to 350, 345, somewhere in there. But honestly, I mean, look, if he has to play, however many snaps or whatever, as long as he's playing the snaps that that he's not on some sort of limit because he physically can't go. I don't really care what the weight is. It's a performance thing for me. And I think they feel like his performance will be optimized at that lower weight. And that's great. I hope, he checks in for that. But ultimately the number doesn't matter. He was, nobody would have wanted him to be at 366 or 380, which he was reportedly playing at times at Texas last year, but he was hell of effective. So I don't know. If you give me 380 and tell me he's going to play like he did last year for Texas, then I'll take it. So I don't know. I think the weight thing gets overblown to some degree. And I know it's got to be a talking point just because of how big he is and that they've already put it out there that they want him a certain weight and all that. But ultimately it's about performance to me, and we'll see what that is when the tape comes on.
I'm interested because to piggyback off of what Mike said, yeah, I really don't care either. If he's 500 pounds and they're doing like a Lifetime documentary about him or whatever, my 500-pound life in football, that's all gravy as long as he's moving well and we get the T'Vondre Sweat that we saw at Texas last year. But I do think it's interesting to point out that accountability has been a focal point of this conversation all offseason. So for T'Vondre Sweat, they talked about communicating expectations. Now, if they went to him and they said, we want you down to 365, and he shows up for camp at 365, I think it's an interesting observation to say, okay, he is taking this seriously. And I think it confirms like, okay, we feel good about this. Like we held him accountable. He got the work done. He did what we said. I think that's, something that was probably had behind closed doors, if there is an exact number, if that was even said. But if they say, we want you at 365 and he shows up at 380, then I think you could look at it and say maybe there is some validity to these maturity questions or something like that. I'm just playing devil's advocate here because I think that's an interesting way we could look at that too.
Okay, so we were talking about Jeffrey Simmons earlier in the podcast, Stoney, and how he's ranked number 4 on ESPN's list, how they pretty much said that when he chooses to focus and take over a game, he's unstoppable. The one guy said that he should have a Justin Madubuike-like season under this new Raven-style defense that they're bringing with a lot of blitzing, obviously. Jeffrey Simmons has never had a double-digit sack season. Last year, Justin Madubuike had 13 sacks. He went from 5.5. So these are how his totals went. Rookie year, 1 sack. Next year, 2 sacks. The year after that, 5.5 sacks. This last year, 13 sacks and 12 tackles for loss and 33 quarterback hits. Is this the year that Jeffrey Simmons, I'll start with you, Stoney, is this the year that Jeffrey Simmons gets to double-digit sacks?
Yes, I think so, because I think I like T'Vondre Sweat a lot. I think he can be the guy that we think he'll be, and I think it's an upgrade. I think him and Sebastian Joseph Day are both upgrades over Teair Tart and the ragtag group of defensive linemen that he had around him last year. So I think, and I've wondered this, like Jeffrey Simmons is the last person on the Titans defense that I want to be critical of. But objectively speaking, watching the tape prior to his injury, because he missed like the last 5 games of the season or whatever, there were times that, I'm not saying he thought this, but the play on the field kind of looked like, okay, we suck. Why am I giving it my all? Like there's a lot of him being stood up and being washed out of the play. He's got his eyes in the backfield, reading the quarterback, trying to tip a pass, maybe looking to make a play too much. And so I think if that switch is turned off and he is just all gas, no brakes for the entirety of the season. And if Joseph Day and if Sweat are what I think they will be, then I think he should have a monstrous season.
Where are you at, Mike, on Jeffrey Simmons and the prospects of having a double-digit sack season?
I think there's a pretty good chance that this is the year if he stays healthy. For one, just staying healthy, I think gives him a pretty good chance any given year, just because I think he's kind of right at that cusp anyways, the last few years with the injuries and everything. So I think if he stays healthy, I think he gets there this year, because I do think Sweat will help him. I think it'll take some of the load off of him, both literally and figuratively, from an early down standpoint. Allowing him to be more pass rush focused. And then also, I think a big factor that's going to benefit all these pass rushers is the cornerbacks. I think playing tighter coverage, making quarterbacks hold the ball a little bit longer with guys like Snead and Awuzie and McCreary, who all kind of specialize in disrupting timing of the offense. Those little moments, those split seconds, can be the difference between a pressure or a hit or a sack. So getting more of those little snippets of time from their secondary, I think will make a difference, and I think I think that alone could take Simmons from a 7 or 8 sack guy to a 10 or 12 sack guy.
Yeah, I think maybe shooting for that 13 number that is a little high, but I do think that maybe he can get to 10 and a half this year. And I agree with you guys. It really just, there's a lot of factors. And that's kind of where I guess I struggle with kind of on the same wavelength as Stoney's, because I kind of got the sense of Simmons last year in that same situation. And it's like, okay, well, what if things don't go perfectly, but Jeffrey Simmons does stay healthy? And that's the most likely scenario is that Simmons can stay healthy, but the defensive line rotation goes through a bunch of growing pains throughout the season. It does not gel as quickly as possible. There's a lot of issues. So can he be the guy that rises above? And in that scenario, I'm like, okay, well, maybe he's an 8.5 sack guy because of, the blitzing and them putting him in different situations and the cornerback, and not a double-digit guy. But I would like to see, as long as he stays healthy. First off, I think him staying healthy is kind of an underrated storyline that we're probably not really talking about enough as a collective. I mean, he played through injuries 2 years ago, struggled in some games 2 years ago. Got injured and missed games last year. That's a big storyline for a guy that we know when healthy is good, but he's got to stay healthy. And that's kind of like a lot of guys on this team. You can say that about, well, if he stays healthy, he's going to be really good. And that's kind of a scary makeup of a team, to have some of your best guys have injury concerns. So, and do you guys think that he leads? I don't think he leads the team in sacks, because Glory Day Sports says if Simmons finishes that high, do you anticipate him leading the team in sacks? I don't think so when we get to the Edge talk next week. But that would be sad if your defensive tackle, that probably should be getting double teamed almost every play, leads the team in sacks, right? I mean, it's not like he's Aaron Donald. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's a little bit different with Aaron Donald, but it's probably not that good, is it?
Madubuike led the Ravens in sacks last year, though, didn't he?
Did he? Did he lead the Ravens?
I'm pretty sure he did.
Well, here's my question. Let's say Simmons leads the team with 12 sacks. Who else on this Titans defense is going to get 13 sacks?
Yeah,
Landry.
I guess that's true.
Landry. Yeah,
doubtful. If you're relying on that.
Well, he had 12 2 years ago.
It just depends, I guess, how many plays have already been. I guess how many plays are over by the time that he gets to the quarterback. Since he doesn't affect any plays.
Oh, sure. Yeah, 12th in the NFL in sacks per game in the last 3 years. Yeah, terrible.
Yeah, the last 3 years.
Terrible. Zero chance he's going to get one more than his career high.
Hilarious to me. So it's hilarious to me that
one more than his career high with the best cornerback play of his whole career.
But then you Then you'd have 25 sacks between two Titans players, and that just sounds absurd to me.
It sounds
I don't
high.
know.
Kinda
It sounds
sounds-
high. I'd be surprised if you got both of those. I think it'll be one of the two that leads.
Tavondre Sweat. Statistically, what are your realistic expectations for Tavondre Sweat? We'll start with you, Mike.
I don't know, like 3 sacks, maybe 10 tackles for loss would be a good year for him. He's not going to be a huge sack producer. I think his impact in the pass rush will be more felt in pressures, collapsing the pocket, pinning quarterbacks in, more so than getting the quarterback actually on the ground. I think that'll be for the cleanup guys like Landry.
Yeah.
I would add to that,
You.
play some snaps in every game. Stay healthy, stay on the field. You don't have to, I don't expect him to have like a 90% snap count on defense, but get out there and be present. And I was going to say 4.5 sacks, but I think Mike's is more realistic. I think I'm too lost on the Tavondre Sweat sauce right now.
I'm going 5.5 sacks. That's my prediction. 5.5.
I'm probably high on the 10 tackles for loss thing too. I think it probably more like 7 or 8 would be good.
It'll be interesting to see because, I mean, the biggest thing is that he's a pocket mover. And when you have Simmons out there as well, one of those guys is going to benefit from the other, right? Because we talked about how maybe Sweat's the multiplier for this team. There's only so many ways you can block a defensive line and your linebackers and your edge rushers and all this stuff. And with having both Simmons and Sweat's like a pick your poison if Sweat is the pocket mover that he was at Texas. And there's no reason right now to think that he couldn't be that, even though people want to go ahead and assume he is not that. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens with this defensive line, how the depth is affected and all that kind of stuff. Next week, we'll talk about the edge rushers. We'll get to Harold Landry and Arden Key and Rashad Weaver and Tommy T. Rush and all those guys that are pretty bad. Like, it's just going to be a depressing episode, I feel like, for the most part.
I got a hot take brewing for next week.
Okay. All right.
Our little Landry tiff is just a preview. We'll have the full-on Landry battle next week.
Yeah, I'm actually going to include his whole career. I'm not just going to cherry pick seasons and stuff like that. I'll actually.
Are you going to go back to when he was a backup as a rookie?
Hey, so a lot of players start as backups. But yeah, I know you wouldn't want to include that because that hurts your case and everything. But
it really doesn't. I mean, he's had 9 or more sacks in 3 of the 4 seasons that he's played over the last 5 years. I think that's right. I mean, he's been extremely productive, and I don't know why everyone hates him. Yeah, I understand he's not Myles Garrett. I understand he's not Myles Garrett. Newsflash. Yeah.
Well, he's like your 20th best edge rusher in the NFL. So
maybe
the NFL even just told us that he didn't even get one vote by anybody that he was a top 10 player or honorable mention.
Let me ask you guys this: are you guys watching the Hard Knocks thing with the Giants?
No, not yet.
I've watched just via Twitter
the clips. Watch that. It will deteriorate your faith in all of these, unnamed front office sources around the league because some of these guys are fucking idiots. And it's probably not just the Giants.
Right.
What?
In this case, you're right, because we're going to go through the list. I'm going to ask you, how many of those guys would you rather have over or Harold Landry over? We'll see.
No, I probably wouldn't rather have most of those guys over Landry. There will be a few on that list because I've already looked at it. But
being the best Titans edge rusher is like being the best Titans wide receiver. It's not that hard to be the best Titans wide receiver for this team. It's a low bar for this team. But we'll get into that next week. Bluegrass Beverages are a sponsor. Stoney and Mike at Mike Herndon NFL, at Stoney Keeley on Twitter. I'm Zach at F Words Pod. This has been Football and Other F Words, and you have just been effed.